All right, guys, let's get into this one. I want to talk about personal development and self-improvement in this video. I'm going to try and keep this one a little shorter, try and riff a little more or shoot from the cuff. Yes, guys, I use notes. That's why I have my computers in front of me. I'm 52. I can't remember a full YouTube script. I can't always remember what my next talking point is going to be, so therefore I use the computer. So when I look down, guys, yes, I am looking at my computer. But anyways, guys, back to the video on this. So let's talk about personal development or self-improvement. Sort of come into fashion, let's say the last decade, maybe a little bit more. There's no shortages of blogs, vlogs, and anything littered all over social media. Personal development and self-improvement is sort of come cachet. I didn't get into personal development in my 20s, guys. I'm 52. And it really wasn't a thing. There certainly weren't the podcasts or the videos that there are today. But I even, as somebody who loves to read books, I wasn't even doing that. I certainly wasn't chasing any life optimization or life hacks. I was just sort of living with a lot of pain pills, a copious amount of alcohol, and a shitload of mediocrity. So I can certainly say at that point in my life, personal development wasn't my identity or something I sort of identified with like I do now. I wasn't that guy. I wasn't reading books on, personal development. I wasn't really reading any books. Again, if somebody who's, sort of a voracious reader now, I wasn't reading shit, but not the philosophy books I would read now, the psychology, sort of the Evo Psych, Evo Bio, and, just human behavior and, and how to maximize human potential. Again, I wasn't optimizing routines. I didn't have the, 10 bullet point checklist of a morning routine. I was just living life. As I said earlier, working odd jobs, taking a lot of pills, drinking a lot of booze, and doing a lot of nothing. But I say that I worked, but, I was sort of figuring things out as I went along. I was most definitely flying by the seat of my pants. Personal development at that point, guys, was not a quote-unquote brand for me. It sort of became a necessity. And that leads me into the next point here. How did I get into it? What was my realization? What was my why? Well, I can think of two. And again, these were a little later. I talked about it in this video here, which gives you a little more context on who I am and sort of my backstory. But in my late 20s, I was, my health was falling apart. I was very, very sick, shockingly, when I was abusing the substances that I was. But I also had a cancer scare that turned out to not be cancer, thankfully. But that was I called that my epiphany event. I had to change my life around. That was more physically, I suppose, my physical sort of lead into self-improvement. I started taking care of my body a little bit more. But a few years later would come, and I would say somewhere around my mid-30s, say 35, 36, after a broken engagement on my part. We'll talk more about that in another video. In fact, that's another book. Anyways, guys, I had this kind of mindset then. I was very sort of, indoctrinated. If you want to call it beta or blue pill, that's a very common vernacular. I was probably that, at least in many aspects of my life. So what I did realize then was I started to look around and I realized that I was capable of so much more than I was doing. Again, I was just going through the motions, go to work, and I did do the gym, but, I would just wash, rinse, and repeat my life, living that 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, waste away on the weekends. And that was, the point. I knew I was doing this. I knew I was wasting potential and I was wasting my life. And then I also, I didn't have that, I knew discipline is what I needed, far more of it at least. And I knew that discipline does literally change everything. Jocko Willink's book, Discipline is Power, I think that's the name of the book. Either way, guys, I knew that to get to where I wanted to be, I needed far more discipline in my life. I was just living sort of aimlessly, going through the motions, as I said earlier, and just, getting through the day. Doing small things, but not enough. So at some point, I realized nobody's going to fix anything for me. I can point fingers, what society's wrong, or this is wrong, or that's wrong. And these are the reasons that I, ended up in the position I was. And I knew that was complete bullshit. No one was coming to save my ass. And frankly, and here's another realization that I think a lot of guys need to come to is, nobody really gives a shit, guys. Now, don't be binary, as I always say. Yes, you have family and loved ones that care about you, but for the most part, society, let's use that word, they don't really give a shit if you succeed or fail. As I've said before, most people are far more concerned with their own lives to really give a shit about yours. So, what did I start doing differently? Well, as I said earlier, the first changes were, late 20s after my health scare. I started training harder and taking fitness seriously. And even more so, guys, I would say post, say 35, I really started focusing on sort of, lifting and sort of maximizing, what I was doing in the gym, outside of the gym, my diet, etc. I started to get back into reading, and I would say this probably came in again right around the mid-30s, reading more. The philosophy, like I said, the psychology, evo bio, evo psych, evolutionary biology, evolutionary psychology, in those type of books. I also was reading books about, my vocation, how to sell better, how to, be more influential, but also on, like some of the Stoic stuff. I don't consider myself a Stoic, guys, but I do like Stoic, some of the philosophy and a lot of sort of the knowledge that comes from those folks. And then I started questioning how people live. Sort of, I don't know if that, matrix had become in vogue then, and I really don't think it did. But seeing the world for what it was, not this sort of, again, blue pill ideology and indoctrination and, all these things that I questioned. I started questioning how I was living and how the world was as a whole. I don't know exactly what that moment was, but there was a realization. And then also, guys, on how I viewed myself, as I said earlier, I stumbled into started blogs at this time. The guy I first kind of stumbled into on sort of self-development as far as, sort of a man in dating and that type of thing was a guy named Troy Francis. I think Troy's still around. I think he's my age. I think he's still around. I think he does dating and sort of relationship advice. I'm sure he's somewhere on the internet, on YouTube. But then more importantly, I don't know how, going down this sort of rabbit hole, I ended up finding the Rational Male, Rollo Tomasi, that guy. And his writing really related with me. Rollo does a lot of podcasting and YouTube content now, but I'm not trying to slight that, but I preferred his blogs in his writing. He's got, I think, 5 or 6 books these days. The guy is an absolute top-notch writer. He knows how to tell a story. And the most important things and I know that's going to seem crazy, because he was fucking rational. What he said made sense. And I took a lot of those things moving forward. So guys, moving on. I started making these small changes. And, maybe they weren't enough, but they did. As crazy as it sounds, these small things started to compound. I've talked about that in other videos, guys, on compounding. So what does personal development, self-improvement actually mean? Well, I suppose it can mean different things to different people, but here's where my perspective is on it. It is not about motivation. If you need to go to watch me rant here or other people rant before you start to make changes, you're starting from the wrong place. Your motivation, guys, has to be intrinsic. I'm going to say that again. Your motivation absolutely must be intrinsic, meaning it has to come from within you. You can get motivated for a short time by, watching, YouTube, motivators, listen to a song that pumps you up, watching Instagram or TikTok or clips, etc. But that's going to be fleeting, guys. Discipline is what's going to endure. Affirmations. Sort of the same thing, guys, going off that motivation. I can wake up and say into the mirror that, I'm going to be confident today, or I'm going to be rich today, etc., etc. But none of that, again, those are fine to do if you want to do those, but none of those are going to do a damn thing without action. It's sort of going back to, if you're a religious person, praying for something. Well, prayer without action, is, and it's like pissing in your pants, I suppose. You can do it, just not a really good idea. And then hustle culture and that sort of grind set. For some maybe younger guys, maybe that's what personal development and self-improvement's about, and that's okay. But I say post 35, post 40, post 50 guys, I don't think that's what it's about. Unless you're terribly behind, at this point in your life, it shouldn't be about that. What it should be about are these things, guys. First and foremost, discipline, as I talked about. Guys, discipline is the foundation. It is the fucking core. You have to get that. You have to be willing to do the things you don't want to do repeatedly. That's discipline. I said, it's not about, necessarily the cold shower. It's about taking that cold shower when you absolutely don't fucking want to do it. I'm just using that as an example, guys. It could be going to the gym, reading a book, whatever it is. And then responsibility. Guys, so many of us in this sort of fucking, victimhood society we are in, and I say I use the United States and I use Western sort of cultures to, point this out. We want to blame everybody else, the system, whoever the fuck else, anybody but ourselves. Guys, you have to take ultimate responsibility. What does that mean? Well, taking responsibility for everything in your life. You may not be culpable for it. It may not be your fault, but how you react to it most definitely is. Here's a great example of that. Viktor Frankl, read his book, Man's Search for Meaning. This guy lost pretty much everything. His career, his wife, his family in a Nazi concentration camp. But he took responsibility for how he reacted to that. His attitude, guys. That's what I'm getting at. And then self-respect. Maybe if, I said, my audience is at 35 plus. Maybe you've let yourself drift, guys. You look in the mirror and you're not the man you once were, and you're not proud of the man you are. Self-improvement and self-development is getting back to that guy. When you look in the mirror, guys, that guy looking back at you is somebody you can respect. You say, you may not be perfect, but you're doing the work to get to where you want to be, where you can be. And then lastly, guys, here, designing your life deliberately on your terms. Guys, doing the things you want. Again, I understand that many of you, if you're married, kids, wives, if you're in a long-term relationship, your job, you have responsibilities. But getting to a point where you're designing the life on your terms and living deliberately. Again, real personal development, guys, to me, it's not a mantra or sort of living an archetype. It's taking that ownership and responsibility of your life. Deciding what kind of person that you want to be, not somebody else. You're not living for anybody else. You are deciding who you want to be. And guys, at 35, this is, why this happens. A lot of guys sort of have this, I don't know if you want to call it epiphany, realization. It is most certainly not a midlife crisis. Do not let anybody tell you that's what it is. I'm going to do a video on that because there is no fucking such thing as a midlife crisis. That's a social indoctrination. Again, I'll get off my soapbox for a minute and move on to the next point here. Here's what most guys and many guys will get wrong. A lot of guys think, personal development is sort of a means to an end, guys. And I say this, and there's a finish line. They envisioned if I do X, Y, and Z, or X, Y, and Z for the folks that cross seas that I work with, but there isn't, guys. Personal development, self-improvement's an everyday to the rest of your life type of thing. Getting a little better every day. It is not about chasing status, getting women, clout, and the money. Will some of these things happen, as you develop and become a better person? I suppose, that's going to be sort of a downstream from it, but it shouldn't be your primary goals. And then this sort of striving for perfection. Because I think most of us know, or most of us realize that perfect is not a goal state, and you're never going to be there. The goal should be a little better each day. Which leads me in to my next point. What I believe and what I feel personal development and self-development is all about. It's becoming capable, becoming a more capable and competent man. As I said a second ago, becoming a little better each day, each year. You are better than you were last week, last month, last year, certainly last decade. As I've talked about, guys, and I will continue to hit on, becoming more disciplined, becoming a better version of yourself. Again, that's going to come through discipline. And then to me, what is the ultimate goal? And I think should be the ultimate goal for all men is becoming sovereign. Now, sovereign encompasses a whole realm, but you want to become financially sovereign. You don't want to be beholden to banks, lending institutions, other people. You don't want them having control over you. Sovereignty of movement. Guys, ideally you have at least one passport, at least, but get a few passports that, if God forbids, one country sort of canceled one or took it away, you can still move about. You have sovereignty of where you live, where you are able to move to. And then sovereignty of just over your life. Ideally, you get to a point where you don't have to maybe worry about a boss, a corporation, somebody that controls you, somebody that can cut your job tomorrow. Guys, these things don't happen overnight. Trust me, I'm fully aware. And I'm not fully sovereign yet, but I try and work toward that each day. And I think you should too. As I said, sovereignty encompasses a lot, but it should be, in my opinion, every man's goal. Again, the self-development, self-improvement, it's less about becoming sort of this impressive, flexing, posturing guy. It's more about just simply becoming more competent, more proficient, and more accountable, not only to other people, but to yourself first and foremost, and becoming reliable to yourself and others. So guys, why again is this so critically important post, say, 35, 40? Well, as a lot of us guys, we start to see time, at least perceptually, move faster. Perhaps that's because we have this sort of, sense that our life is probably about half over, maybe a little more, a little less. If you're at 35, 40, probably around halfway, give or take. But you also start to realize your own mortality, that, this isn't going to last forever, and you need to start doing about it. Do something about it. And then routines become permanent, guys. This is a double-edged sword, the good and the bad. Now, if you're doing, things like vices, whether it be drugs, alcohol, the corn hub, those type of things that are detrimental to you. As you keep doing those, guys, eating terrible food, you keep doing those are going to become permanent. Flip that over, guys. When you start doing, go down this path of self-improvement and self-betterment, things like the gym, eating properly, reading more, educating yourself. Let's do that, educating yourself. Those routines become permanent as well. Again, habits are just habits, guys. They can be good or bad. The good thing is you get to choose those. And then, at this age, there comes sort of a tipping point where you risk drifting aimlessly for the rest of your life, without purpose, without any direction, or you say, all right, let's turn this around. I want to sort of start realizing my potential. So guys, for most of us, I don't think this is, this is a heuristic, a rule of thumb. Your 20s can be sort of chaotic. You don't quite know exactly what you want. You have different jobs, bouncing around, chasing girls. But then maybe in your 30s, you start sort of building. You start to enter your career, maybe a marriage, maybe a long-term relationships. But somewhere, let's use 40, you start to either sharpen yourself, or as you said, just said, you start to fade, guys. You start to become sort of inconsequential if you let yourself go. And there becomes a point, guys, where you have to draw a line in the sand and tell yourself, no more fucking coasting, no more mediocrity, or you start to fade away, guys. And as I said, you become somewhat insignificant and you settle into this average life. And that same sands that, you're supposed to draw a line in, they just start dripping through that hourglass day by day, and you're just watching them. Guys, what are some of the unexpected, let's call them ancillary benefits of this self-improvement, self-development? Well, for me, And I think for a lot of guys, you're going to have more clarity. You're going to see things far more clearly, guys. You will know what you want. Probably more importantly, you'll know what you don't want, and which you will not tolerate anymore. Discipline, guys. You'll have stronger discipline. You know, doing hard shit every single day, guys. That needs to be a goal. Introduce friction into your life, doing hard shit. Better decisions, guys. With better discipline, with more clarity in your life, you are going to make better decisions. You know, you're going to avoid some of those vices, those sedations, let's call them, that are going to hold you back. You know, you're going to get rid of this sort of detrimental garbage and people in your life. As I said before, things you won't tolerate. You don't need to tolerate these energy vampires and people that are tearing you down or bringing you down. The crabs in the bucket, guys. We're not going to deal with them anymore. Better decisions. More self-respect. Holding yourself to a higher standard. Your standards, not society's, not anybody else's, your personal standards. And feeling proud, as I said, guys, you know, of the guy that's looking back at you when you look in that mirror. The biggest change for me, guys, wasn't money or success. I was doing okay in those departments, but it was the way I started seeing the world and how I started seeing myself, more importantly. You know, I started to have this different view of myself. And more importantly, the vision of the person I wanted to be. All right, guys, I appreciate you sticking around. As usual, guys, do me a favor, hit that like, hit that subscribe, drop comments below. I love to know your guys' thoughts. Again, the good, the bad, the ugly. Guys, I'm working on fixing the background music. I can't find a perfect background music. I'll try and keep the volume low. Guys already pointed that out to me, and I apologize if it was annoying. I'm working on it. But guys, if you're a guy in your 30s, mid-30s, 40s, 50s, even a little later, guys, you feel like you've got more in the tank, you are most certainly not alone. There are a lot of us, guys, but we don't talk about it. And that's a big reason I've started what I was doing. It's the reason I wrote my book here. Guys, if you haven't read it, it is on Amazon. Got a different cover. I'll put that up on the screen here. Anyways, guys, but that's why I started to do, because I knew I could help guys. As I sort of broke away myself and started to get it better, I also wanted to send the elevator back down, to coin a phrase, or turn a phrase, to help other guys, because there's so many guys drifting and they feel they don't know where to turn or who to talk to. And that's what I want to do, build a sort of community of guys, a tribe, if you will. We can bounce ideas off each other, get better. Iron sharpens iron, guys, and that is the truth. So I appreciate you guys as always. Again, don't stop here. YouTube says, and it's telling me that you need to watch this video next and keep it going. Guys, again, appreciate you. And remember, live deliberately.